Hey, Testpiece climbing, they are amazing, yeah. Just watch all the episodes if you got some island boys. They gon' do some island boy stuff like D-Water, soloing, and rock climbing. Cause they some island boys. Big shout to Josh, Ross, Marco, and Bryce, yeah. Oh, they the best, oh yeah. Oh, Testpiece climbing. They gon' make it to the top. You better watch their podcast, cause the Island Boys do. They some honor Island Boys. Big shout out to them, and we support them.
Okay, we've got the Island Boys here on the Testpiece podcast. Just a couple of boys trying to make it to the top. We've got Marco Giacomangeli. Did I do it right, Marco?
That was perfect.
Yes, dude. Yes. Bryce Belshin and Ross Fulkerson. This is the crew that I went to Mallorca with. I also want to shout out Joe Goodacre and Scott Rojon. They came a little bit later, but they were definitely a couple Island Boys out there too. How you doing, boys? It's good to be back with y'all.
Good.
Doing great.
Yeah, good to be back.
Excited to chat about the trip.
Yeah, dude, it's just I like getting to relive it a little bit. I mean, it was super fun, and when you're there, it just feels totally normal. And you're like climbing, hang out with your buddies every day, and then you leave. You're like, oh yeah, that was kind of special. Like now I'm just back in normal life. So good to get to revisit it. And we had tons of great chats about climbing, beta, all just living the dream while we were in the Fiat Panda. And I wish I had recorded those, but now we're back home, a little bit better leg room, and psyched to have another one. So welcome to the pod, you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
All right, I learned a ton on the trip. And I think you guys did too. I mean, there's always this thing of just having fun doing the thing, but I feel like when you eat, sleep, and breathe climbing during these trips, you always like have some big takeaways. And so, of course, I learned a bunch of new things like lingo, how much better clipper lighters are, finding out that you can, in fact, live solely off of ham, bread, wine, and rollies. But there's some climbing stuff too. So I want to get into that, but there's way too many of you guys for me to intro you all. So let's just have you guys intro yourself, and let's start off with Marco. Marco, where are you based out of? What's the main discipline you like in climbing, and what do you do for work in the climbing industry?
Yeah, so right now I'm based out of San Diego, California. I'm living in like Point Loma, which is pretty close to the beach, a little bit more to the south of San Diego. I work at a bouldering only gym called Grotto, specifically their Miramar location. And I'd say because of that, I spend most of my time bouldering. But I personally think I enjoy sport climbing the most. I just think there's not a ton of really high quality sport climbing around San Diego, so it makes it a little bit more difficult. And I'm working as a coach and a route setter at Grotto, which are two things that I really enjoy.
Yeah, if we were all in Spain, you could say sport climbing, sport climbing, sport climbing, because yeah, it's a little bit better than California is good, but yeah, Spain is great. What about you, Bryce?
So yeah, I grew up in San Diego with Marco, and now I live in Boulder, Colorado, and I coach at ABC, and I work at Kilter doing kind of a bunch of random stuff. And I'm pretty much just focused on outdoor climbing, like sport, trad, and bouldering, all kind of equally. Mostly focused on sport climbing with my training right now.
Okay, Ross, you have been on the pod a few times, but just in case there's some new listeners, can I have you introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, I'm based in San Diego right now, so about a 5 minute walk from Marco, which is super nice. And in the past or up until now, I've been pretty equally split between like comp bouldering and sport climbing, but this year trying to focus a lot more on outdoor. sport climbing and some trad goals and getting outside the comfort zone a bit more, as well as a healthy dose of deep water soloing.
Oh yeah, that whole thing. Uh, so I didn't realize it until maybe halfway through the trip that all of you guys have put quite a bit of effort into coaching climbing. I just thought that you guys were just nice and supportive and helpful, but it turns out that you guys actually, uh, you know, take it seriously. And I'm going to go back to you, Marco. Just like when did you decide coaching was a big part of what you wanted to do in life, and specifically for climbing?
Yeah, I think right after COVID ended, I started coaching at Grotto. I feel like coaching was something that I was always interested in doing. I kind of always felt a calling towards it, but I was never sure if the opportunity was really going to present itself. And once it did, I took the opportunity and I started coaching, and it just became something that was really fun. I feel like it's kind of like an extension of my climbing. It's just another way to enjoy the sport and kind of share all the opportunities of good coaching that I've had, like giving back a little bit. And for me, obviously, just if I go to work and it's at the climbing gym or at the boulders, like that's just makes my life really good. So I think there's a lot of components of coaching that make it really enjoyable.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I just want to point out how it totally is an extension of your climbing, so much so that during this trip, you and Ross ducked out to Barcelona and taught a clinic there, right? And that was with Mind to Motion. Can you just say a little bit about Mind to Motion, and also just like what was it like doing a clinic in Spain at Sharma's gym? Like that's kind of cool, man.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
it
mean,
was.
it was a surreal experience. I don't know if you want to share anything in particular, Ross, about it.
Oh, I was just gonna say it was a dream to be able to go on a trip with all your buddies and then also teach a clinic and feel like you're kind of giving back and connect with a whole nother climbing community. And everyone we met was so psyched and just really fun to work with. And Mind to Motion, for a brief little background on that, is something that Marco and I and a couple other friends in San Diego started. Uh, Marco and I were doing some clinics just on our own here in California, and we're like, it'd be amazing to grow this and include more coaches and setters and basically be able to provide really high performance learning environments for competition kids, but also adults and anyone looking to progress in climbing. So that's been a really cool outlet to teach a bunch of clinics around the nation and now internationally as well.
Yeah, I'm curious what it was like in Spain, uh, or I should say, what was the gym scene like in Spain? What was the setting like? Was it really different for you guys? Or yeah, maybe Marco, like when you went in and started probably setting for the clinic and figuring out the facility, how did that differ from what you were used to doing in California?
Well, honestly, I was surprised by how similar it kind of felt to California. I think we got lucky because Sebastian, the head setter at Sharma Barcelona, is just a really cool guy, and he was extremely supportive of us. He had like stripped the wall and pretty much just like, here are the holds. You guys can do whatever you want. Like if you need anything, just let me know. So I think just starting off on that foot made it a really good experience, and that's pretty similar to what we've have experienced in the U.S. And just for a little bit of context, Mind to Motion has probably done 10 plus events all across the U.S. So we have a bit of experience. Um, I would say the setting at Sharma Barcelona was a little bit more like kind of outdoorsy, you could say. There wasn't a ton of very complex coordination. But I think fundamentally it taught really good climbing, and I think that's because Sebastian himself is a really good, experienced climber. And they did have some coordination that I mean I was falling on, so I appreciated the setting there. A slightly different experience I had was in Madrid, and I found like this really big theme in Madrid of like 99% of the emphasis was just on making the boulders as 3D as possible. So the hold selection was really, really nice, but I thought that maybe it lacked a little bit of movement, or just like it lacked the move because it was too focused on stacking volumes on volumes and just kind of creating something that looks really cool. And that was very distinctly different from the Sharma Barcelona setting.
That's the first time I've ever heard you complain about too many volumes.
Yeah.
All right. Bryce, you are coaching at Team ABC, which is kind of a legendary spot. They've created a couple of good climbers. Maybe people have heard of them, just Olympians, stuff like that. What drew you to that spot, and what's it like coaching there?
I would say like the first things I noticed is that there's a lot more factors that go into making a successful program that I had never considered before. Like everybody thinks setting and coaching, and those are probably the most important, but I would say the other things that ABC has done really well is like a culture. I think building team culture is super important. And then really even just the structure of the program. Like when you have a really big number of kids that are really young climbing together, I think that's kind of when the magic happens because they kind of feed off of each other and it's a lot of energy and they see their peers do something and then they know that they can do it. Um, so I think when programs are able to like combine all those factors is when the special stuff happens.
Yeah, there's something about youth and coaching that seems to go hand in hand. Like I feel like when I think of coaching, I usually think of youth, and then that whole community that brings when you're on like a team and everyone's psyched and working towards something, well, towards success and getting better. Uh, I'm curious, Ross, you grew up in that environment, and now you're doing coaching not just what via mind to motion. That's not just kids always. There's adults. Like, what do you think about coaching and adults? Like, are we going to see more of that? Should it be relegated just to the youth? Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it should not be just exclusive to youth people at all. I mean, everyone is psyched to get better, and it's been almost more rewarding to coach some of these adult clinics because these adults haven't been exposed to a lot of these coaching concepts, and it's so fun to see them progress and do moves that they never even thought were possible at the beginning of the clinic, and then 3 hours later, they're flying around on coordination skate dynos and paddles and stuff. Even in Barcelona, we had this one guy who was maybe about 60 and like a V3 climber. But because we had a bunch of different variations on all the climbs we were setting, like he progressed a ton and at the end was doing these like pretty legit little skate dynos that we had set up, and having a great time. So I think it's more fun for adults to be able to climb with their peers, and for the same reasons that Bryce just listed, like push themselves and see someone that's at their level like find success on a move or get outside their comfort zone and then find out that it's actually like within their ability. So yeah, I would love to see more coaching for adults. And like Marco actually started or helped to start an adult team at the gym and grotto here in San Diego, and I'm sure he can speak more to this, but it seems like it's been really successful, and it's cool to walk into the gym at like 6 p.m. and team is starting up and everyone's doing the same warm-up exercises and getting after it.
Yeah. I mean, just to add to that a little bit, I think Bryce and Ross, you made really good points. I think people often like look at team kids and are just like, why are these kids so good? Like this is insane. And it's because they have like a coach who's there to kind of guide them through climbing, and they have this awesome like group of other kids that push them constantly. And I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be the exact same for adults, and why adults shouldn't be seeking out that experience, because it's just going to give you an opportunity to learn, and it's also going to be really fun. So there's just no downside.
Yeah, I would almost argue that kids need it less in some ways. I almost feel like kids just will find success where adults maybe stay in their comfort zone. But yeah, what do you think about that, Bryce?
I mean, I think if any of us think back on our best sessions, it was probably with a group where we were all like feeding off each other's energy and coming up with cool ideas that we were sharing and pushing each other. And yeah, people, I don't know. That's just where I think that's why spray walls can be so awesome, is when you're like coming up with new ideas and sharing them, and the energy just really builds between people.
Well, the reason why I wanted to start this out by talking a little bit about coaching is that I I've traveled a lot with a lot of crews. You guys were an awesome crew. That was so fun. Just I appreciate you guys having me along. And what I noticed was also just how supportive you guys were. Supportive is the wrong word. It's not just like, oh, like good, you got this. Like there was kind of almost a undertone or of a seriousness of helping each other after all the joking, after the making fun of each other. But the one of the things I really remembered early on in the trip is we were at Cova del Diablo, and that's that like amazing cliff in Mallorca that has the Alascot and two smoking barrels. It's kind of like it's probably the best, maybe one of the best deep water soiling cliffs in the world. And at the bottom of it, you all kind of hang out in this little cave, and it probably only could house maybe four people, maybe five or six if you really want to squish in there. And Ross had been trying this one 8B called, it's a really long name, we'll just call it Sunshine. And he had given it a good flash burn. And then when you came down, when you fell in the water and were drying off, just before you set off to go again, I think it was Marco was like, what are you going to do differently this time? And it was this switch. It was this like, we're having fun, we're just sitting in the sun, drying off. And then there was just this like, yeah, that was a good attempt. What are you going to do differently this time? And like I said, I didn't quite realize that you guys were all coaches until maybe about halfway through. And that just stood out in my head as like, oh, like that's not that it was something that's totally foreign to me, like, trying to articulate what you're going to do next on this attempt, but something about being together and then having to say it out loud what you're focusing on. And then if you don't do it, we're going to give you shit if you half-ass it. So uh, I wanted to leapfrog that into maybe saying, hey, Marco, what did you notice on this trip as a coach that you saw one of us do or multiple instances of us do that you really learned from and it jumped down your head from that lens as a coach?
Yeah, I mean, always on these trips, being surrounded by amazing climbers like you guys, there's just so much to learn. But I think for me, what really stood out about Mallorca and the style of climbing is just the level of execution that's required. And I think a big part of that is just being like really present in the moment, like where you are and kind of what is needed of you to do the climb. So I think the thing that I was learning the most about and observing the most was watching people like flip the switch into, all right, this is happening now. And something I thought that was really unique about this trip is that like every time someone was about to flip the switch or was like in that moment, I could just like completely feel the energy of like, okay, this person is like locked in right now and they're about to execute. Like I think about watching Ross on the 8B plus at the Sharma Cliff, watching Bryce on a sunburn of all cats are black in the night, and Josh watching you on that 8B at Cova del Diablo. And I swear, I don't know if it's just me, and I'm interested to hear your guys' opinion, but like when people are kind of entering that mode, I can just feel it's like the atmosphere and the air changes. And as a coach, it's just really interesting to think about like what goes into that kind of feeling in that atmosphere and for each athlete, kind of what goes into flipping the switch.
Well, I want to hear from Ross. I was not there for when you sent that thing at the Sharma Cliff. From your perspective, were you actually locked in? Like, did you feel like you had, like an energy shift that was palpable?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was at the point where I knew I could send it, and I put in the time, like mentally and like physically, in terms of like warming up well and everything. Um, so I could get down and sit on that little ledge right above the water and like have the confidence to do it. And I think it's almost about like mitigating any little like nagging distractions and things. Like we could get into this with a much longer conversation, but like being able right before you go to just fully be present. I think a big part of that is like being confident that you've actually done like the preparation and within the context of like things you can control in that moment. Like I definitely had doubts about like just being fatigued and tired and a bunch of other things that are outside of my control in that moment, but I felt pretty confident that I had done like everything I needed to do that day and within like the last half hour to like give the best go I could on that. So it's really fun once you have kind of a consistent process like that to get into that state and just know that you are going to be locked in once you get on the wall.
What about for you, Bryce? Did you have that same feeling, or was Marco just totally wrong?
I also wasn't there at that exact moment, but but in general, I definitely enjoyed watching people get flash burns on this trip, and obviously because it's deep arch soloing, like you just climb till you fall, and that is different from what I'm used to because I spent a lot of time in rifle, and a lot of people there, including me, are like super over reliant on projecting, and you want to like be control every factor and be totally prepared, and then like give your send burn. Um, but it's a lot more fun, I think, kind of leaving more things up to chance and kind of more playing the game, I would say. And yeah, I enjoyed watching with Ross the way that he prepares for first tries, like very tangible physical things, like physically preparing himself or breathing really loudly. And I think it's cool to see that you're not afraid to like try really hard, even on something that might be a grade that you might not consider at your limit. And I really enjoy seeing that because I think a lot of people might approach a certain climber grade and think, oh, this one should be easy for me, so I don't want to be seen like power screaming on it or anything like that. Um, but yeah, I enjoy like approaching every route with humility in that way.
Yeah, those things are kind of connected where there's this almost like dominoes. Like, okay, so I heard what you were saying, Marco, where it's like you can almost feel that energy shift where it's like it's game time, let's see it. But then Ross, when you're talking about it, you're like, I had done this work beforehand. I had done these steps, and then even thinking about that flashing stuff from Bryce, where it's like, okay, like let's give it my all. Like, I guess what I'm getting at there is how do you like what are those dominoes that you need to stack? Like maybe Marco, after seeing that happen, like and thinking as a coach, like it's not just like it's going to be a decision, like and the energy is here now, like let's execute. Like how do you kind of like start that chain reaction, or how have you taken that what you saw and tried to employ it into your own climbing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was like Ross was speaking to. He was he was just very present. Like he knew where he was mentally, he knew what he needed to do, and he felt like he did those things. So there's a certain level of like letting go and being like fully immersed in the moment, which that's something that really sticks out to me. I think something that sticks out to me watching Ross climb as well, and Bryce, you were just speaking to this, is just like how hard he's willing to try. I think that's something that I struggle with. But it's really inspiring to see. And I think that especially in something like outdoor rock climbing, it's just 100% essential. Like, I don't think most people know how hard they can truly try. And being able to access that full try hard consistently, I think is really important for making those moments come together, even regardless of if you feel like you're going to send or not.
Yeah, I want to echo that. Watching Ross try hard on everything. The one I was thinking of was this 8A called Football Fan out at Fragwell, and I put the draws up and gave it an on-site burn, and it had just rained, and there was like no chalk anywhere, and I gave it a good fight, and I really did. I was like, I really tried hard. I got up there, I was like, damn, this thing is hard. And it kind of ends with like a really sinister little crimpy crux, but it's quote unquote only 8A, and I've seen Ross eat 8A for breakfast. Um, but because of all those things that I was just saying, where it was maybe not a lot of chalk, we didn't really have good beta, and it was also the end of a long day. And then Ross, you like hung it all out there and you fought for it. Where I don't know, like I could imagine someone just being like, "Oh, it's just an 8A. Like, what's the point? Like, why should I fight here? Like, no sponsor's gonna care that you flashed another 8A, you know?"
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know if I've asked myself that same question before, but it's just about like being present in that moment and like what you're gonna regret not trying. And there's always I don't want to leave like question marks on the wall. And then maybe that comes from honestly that comes from like our coach Al and talking and like debriefing rounds in competition where the faster you can cross off potential options for beta or whatever, the easier it's going to be to like figure out the right solution. So trying to make the most of every single attempt and fighting hard on whatever that move is really important. And to Bryce's point, like letting go of the ego side of things, like it really doesn't matter how hard or easy the route is. Like if you're pumped, like you need to fight hard, like, and it looks well, it just doesn't matter what other people think really, but in my mind, like it looks worse if you just give up than it does if you fight hard on something, even if it is easy. And I always kind of am harder on myself if I just like drop off the wall than if I know I fought hard within like the confines of like you're not going to get injured or you're just like being safe. uh yeah, but I'm definitely it's really fun for me to like try hard on things that I have no idea like what the moves are going to be, and you kind of have to really shift your expectations before getting on that route and get out of like that complacent mindset and just be along for the ride almost.
Yeah, like that you said you don't want to leave a question mark. Like you'll feel really bad if you didn't give it your all later. Bryce, you had pointed that out early on the trip to me. We were at Fragwell, and I think I had on sighted like a 7C, something like gorilla something, and you were like you were projecting humanoid like a much harder one near there, and you're just like, dude, like way to try hard on that thing. And so now that we're a couple of months past and you're looking back, like what did you take from all that and put into your climbing or share with the kids that you coach about making sure that you show up for that first try?
I really like the idea of you should never be ashamed to try hard. And I hate to see a climber like make fun of another climber. Like even if you're in the gym on an auto belay, like you can power scream, and I'll respect somebody if I see that if they're power screaming on a 5.8 on the auto belay. Like that's what I want to see. I think that's what people should be there for.
Damn, I like that. That was really good. Power screaming on the 5A. All right, good beta price. uh, okay, Ross, what did you see that influenced you? I mean, I gotta say we were all maybe on a little bit of a notch easier than you, although maybe you saw it in some of the other climbers that we climbed with. But what did you take away that you saw us do that kind of as a coach or even as an athlete, you're just like, oh, interesting, and you learned something from?
Yeah, I mean there's so many things, but I think because of the inherent risk, well, perceived risk maybe of deep water soloing, like it's very different than what we're used to, and there are more question marks. But it was fun to see all your guys' process for like dealing with that risk and trying to shift from a more like analytical, like, okay, like what's going to happen if I fall and blah, blah, blah. And I hope I was somewhat helpful in like uh, describing like that it's just going to be fine and like you're just going to fall in the water, and like giving it a couple attempts where you're fine just falling. And then when it is time to try hard, it was like cool to see everyone like take those last big like psyched breaths and then give everything a sunburn, especially like Marco, watching you on Lost Cotton's Two Smoking Barrels flash that thing was super epic, because that was like the first legit deep water solo that I did, and it was like such a transformative experience. And I was down in that cave that you described earlier, Josh, and I saw Marco set up for it and then just execute it perfectly. And there was like a rainbow in the background, and the sun is just glistening off the water, and it was just such an idyllic little cove and place to be with three of my homies. So that was pretty epic to see. And then yeah, watching Bryce on the Black Cat, whatever that one's called, was the same thing, where you just like fought so hard and hit that hold just how you needed to. And I could kind of like see from my perspective like your face like as you like went for that next like kind of big move on the sloper, and like your eyes were just like so psyched when you hit that. And I guess like overcoming fear, that was like the coolest thing to watch. Same with you, Josh, at the top of that Sunshine 8B thing, where like I know your guys are scared in that position, and like I was too when I did those climbs. And then seeing you kind of push past that point and really get into that state where you're just in like execution mode was fun to watch.
There's something about trying hard is always great. Just like Bryce was saying, like it is cool to see someone power scream, whatever the grade is, whatever situation is. But it does seem like there's a little bit of another layer when you have to push past fear or perceived fear even, right? And Marco, I remember when you did Lost Cut and you were freaking on cloud nine. You were a changed man. And I like, can you take us to that climb for you?
Yeah, for sure. I think to provide like a little bit of context, my previous experience with deepwater soloing was at the North Face Climb Festival in New York, like a month before. And that was a really interesting experience for me, because every time I would top out on that wall, the Seco block wall, I would look over and be like, I'm not jumping off of this. Like, this is terrifying. But while I was climbing, there was absolutely no fear, and I had no problem like climbing at my limit in that zone where I'm like, I don't want to like jump off even in a controlled manner. So it was our first day of climbing in Mallorca when we went to Cova del Diablo, and I just remember like it was warm. I remember just being so excited to like see the climbing and to do the climbing. I was just like ecstatic. So actually walking up to the cliff and seeing the wall it was beautiful. And I also was looking over the top like, oh man, this is like kind of high. Like, I don't know if I'd really like to jump off the top of this even, but like I'm excited to climb up to that point. So we warmed up on Afroman, which is a really cool, I don't even remember the grade. I think it's like 512A or something. And that tops out like pretty low. So it's like a good confidence builder. And I'm pretty sure the next thing that I tried was Lost Caught. Before I tried it, I went up on a rope and felt some of the top out moves. And that was actually pretty important because I got some really good beta from a local climber. And then I just remember going down to the cave and like looking up at the wall and being like, oh man, like I'm a little nervous. Like I think I could stick the dyno, but once I stick that dyno, like I'm going to be up there. And it's like, I know I'm not going to let myself come back down. So then I pretty much just pulled onto the wall. The section up until the dyno went very smooth for me. I set up for the dyno really well. I was about to go off of this lower right foot, but at the last second, I decided to bring my right foot up, and I think that was a really good idea. I specifically remember on the dyno really focusing on standing up over my feet and trying to get my hips into the wall over the bulge. And I remember being scared setting up for the dyno, like, oh man, this is like kind of terrifying. But then the second I stuck, like my hand hit the jug, it was just over. Like, I think it was the perfect amount of risk where it just kind of chucked me into a flow state. And I had this really cool moment of kind of like cooling down on the jug and resting and just like feeling the adrenaline and hearing the waves hitting the wall. And that's something I really love about Mallorca is just like every time you get onto the wall, there's such a unique like sound experience, and you're just looking around at your friends in these caves and hearing the ocean. Um, and from there, I just kind of like calmed down and walked through to the top. And I think the style suited me really well. So it was, like I said, it was a really cool experience where the difficulty really matched my level. And I was afraid, but not too afraid. And it just made it like really exciting and an amazing experience.
Just rainbows and unicorns topping out. It's got to be one of the coolest climbs in the world. I when we talked about it, you said you kind of blacked out after hitting the jug. So just to break Lost Got Down, you probably not. It's not too difficult climbing up to about midway, maybe a little bit over midway, 35 feet up. We'll say you do a all points off dyno to a jug. You get you definitely get a rest, and then I'm gonna say it's like a V4 V5 top out, which it's high up. Like all of a sudden now you're at 60 feet, and I I don't know, this idea of just blacking out and then executing, I think it's like this state that we always want to get into, but maybe it has something to do with where you said it was the right difficulty for you at that point, but just, as a coach, like, how do you think about instigating these moments in your athletes? Is that a switch you can flip more consistently, or is it something that you're not as in control of?
Yeah, I'm not sure, honestly. That's a good question. I do distinctly remember being really, really like consumed by the feeling of excitement. Like there wasn't any like, oh, am I gonna fall here and feel dumb about that? Am I gonna like mess this up? It was just like, oh man, this is like scary, but really, really cool. And I was just completely consumed by that feeling. And I think that's usually when I do my best climbing is when I'm just really excited to climb. So I think at least for me, that's a really important part of it.
I'm curious, Bryce or Marco, if you try and instill that with the kids and adults that you coach, like finding that intrinsic motivation. Because I totally agree with you where all my best climbing is or are the attempts where I'm doing it like for myself and I'm not distracted by like the judgments of other people. But I haven't really thought about that in terms of like coaching that or like trying to describe that to like a 10-year-old.
Yeah, I don't know. I definitely do work on the execution type stuff a lot, even with the little kids, and having like a kind of ritual that you can repeat every time to get yourself in a certain state. But I can't say as far as the intrinsic thing, I definitely I haven't tried to teach that, and I can't think of how you would, honestly.
Yeah, I think it is challenging. I feel like you could try to open a like kind of a dialogue about it, but you don't know how that's going to work with different people. But I feel like for me, just like if there's team outdoor trips or whatever, just kind of leading by example and kind of demonstrating intrinsic motivation through your own experience in climbing, I think can be a cool way
I
to
think it
instill that.
I think it's hard with kids. I'm not so sure kids have as better an idea of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. And I don't know if they have formed the identity as much. Like in some ways you would just say like it's all intrinsic, but then you all know, well, you guys did it too. You start getting like placings and comps. You start like there becomes this switch. I don't know when it is, but it's always there. And in some ways, kids climb with freedom and beauty most of the time, and I think of that as intrinsic. But I do like what you're saying, Ross. Like, there's something about it's easier to be present when you're present because you want to be present.
Yeah, it's like expectations first. Just having the expectations be from yourself. And like I want, like my expectation is that I'm gonna put myself in a position to succeed on whatever you're doing, and that's really like the best you can ever ask for, and usually the most efficient and effective way to like actually do the thing you're trying to do, which is I think a good place to come at like most problems from.
So, Marco, you use these words, excitement. Like I was excited to be there. Like you stuck the jug and you were excited. And I remember I did it, a while ago, and I remember being excited when I stuck the jug too. And then all of a sudden I got freaked out because that excitement of sticking the jug became like, oh wait, I have to execute on, this next section, which, it may have been a walk in the park for you. It's not totally trivial. It's, and because typically it's going to be your first time on there. I know you had felt the holds, but like all of a sudden you're kind of thrust into a new situation. But that word excitement and focusing on that is really interesting to me, because when I walked up to the cliff for the first time, I was scared, man. Like I just remember walking up and being like, whoa, is this okay? Should I really be here? Ross, I know that you get scared of stuff, but I don't know. Maybe you have a good way of channeling these emotional states. Like when you walked up to Cova del Diablo, what were you feeling for the first
Yeah,
time? I should say.
I mean, every time it feels freaking tall. Like it's so much more scary standing at the top of it than being on the wall and looking down somehow. Uh, and like the first trip there, I climbed there, I guess only one day, but I didn't jump off the top. And then this trip, I did jump off the top a couple times. And you're in the air for a long while, and any little like twist in the air, like jumping off without shoes, hurt quite badly. Or like yeah, you definitely don't want to take a legit fall from up there. But I think just channeling the fear or like the energy into something more productive or constructive is usually my strategy, and like recognizing the fear, because that's very natural, but fear is just like a label we put on like all of those signals coming in, and if you can address those signals like kind of systematically, like that whole routine that we do before we climb, then like that's how you get to that point where you can like take that final deep breath before you get on the wall and like have that confidence that you've done everything you can. uh and at some point you kind of have to like override that fear, and like, but that's a maybe a more it's a more replicatable process than you might imagine. It's like trying to get to a point where you like acknowledge that fear and then like basically have a conversation with your subconscious and like say it's going to be okay. Like I've, well, most of the time it's okay. Sometimes you get pulled out to sea and you have to get rescued. Yeah, just being aware of like all the variables within your control, and only being scared of what's actually dangerous or what's relevant in the moment. But everyone's threshold is going to be different too. So I guess that's like important to recognize, where it's like some people are going to be more scared because they just haven't experienced as much fear, or like are less experience with like dealing with that fear.
Well, it's like there's these two things that can happen when you get afraid. There's, do you climb even better, or do you revert back to your old bad habits? I can't remember. Maybe Bryce said that when we were chatting before, like this idea of like, does that fear bring your best climbing out, or does it like make you sink to the level of your training? And in general, what you'll hear people say is like, you're only as good as your training. Like when we get into this like fight or flight mode, you kind of just devolve into like your basic instincts. But I don't know if that's totally true. I feel like there's a way to maybe have it elevate you and do even better. And Ross, I know you have a bunch to say on that, but I want to hear it from Marco, where what do you think about that? Like, does fear always cause you to just kind of sink to the level of your training, or is there a way to utilize it to bring out the best in you?
I mean, I think it's very dependent. Like for me on Lost Cause, it definitely brought out my best climbing. But again, I think that's because it was coming from the right place. I wanted the fear. I was excited. Um, it was something that I was like seeking out. I think as other factors come into play, like I was afraid on Lost Cause, but I knew I was like, I'm probably not gonna like die, right? So that's fine. As the fear becomes more serious, I think, or there's just other factors, like you're worried about things that aren't actually that important, or you're thinking about like more ego-based things. I think that's where, at least in my experience, my climbing really devolves. And to be honest, for the majority of the trip, I was not climbing like how I climbed on Lost Cot. I was really struggling to find that peak, to find that flow, and to really like focus on the excitement. So I think for me, the majority of the time, I did actually struggle to not devolve my movement because of the fear.
Yeah, I feel like I knew that that was something that didn't happen to you every single time you pulled on Marco, and that there's just these like kind of special moments, and like that's what I want to be able to figure out better. Like I would love to know how to at least stack the deck or stack the circumstances so that's more likely to occur, because those moments, I mean, dude, sunshine and rainbows, uh topping it out, like it's, gotta be one of those better memories. But like these seem to be correlated with both peak moments but also peak performance. And so yeah, I mean, Ross, I feel like that idea is connected to flow states and it's something that you are always interested in. Like what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much there, and that's like what I studied and love to try and articulate with my own climbing. But I think at the simplest level, just practicing getting into those states lets you get into more. Like being familiar with what that process looks like for you is really important, and it isn't an accident when you get into those states. And equally so, it's not an accident when you are not getting into those. Like there's very tangible things associated with both like finding flow and not. Like literally there's 10 triggers and like 10 to 12 like flow blockers, and there's like scientific data behind like every one of those triggers and blockers. um, but at its core, it's just is like flow triggers are things that are pushing you into the present moment, and flow blockers are things that are distracting you and bringing your attention elsewhere. So just being really honest with yourself about like what you're doing in that moment, and like what Marco described at the very beginning, where he was saying it felt like there was a tangible shift. Like that was part of like you guys creating that environment as well. Like you guys are very aware, and when you're at the crag and someone's about to give a sunburn, you're not yapping away and asking about the weather tomorrow or like all these distracting questions. Like you allow that person to have that space and like facilitate that energy, which is amazing, and why like I was so psyched to be there with you guys, because uh, you're creating like a super amazing like lighthearted energy between attempts, and then getting into the coaching side of things and holding me accountable to like my goals and adjustments between attempts. And then when I need to give a good go, it gets quiet and it gets a bit more serious. So trying to find that atmosphere like in a day-to-day environment or for your normal sessions is huge, because it just allows you to practice those habits more.
Yeah, man. The crew is crucial, even though when you do something like stick that dyno, you feel so freaking alone. Like Marco, you said something about like the auditory, the nature of deep water solo. You hear the waves crashing, and it's so weird how you can see your buddies. You often can't hear them. I don't know why. Like maybe I don't know, whatever. Acoustically, you can't hear them, but you feel so alone. And I just find this interesting juxtaposition where you're in the cave with your buddies, there's like an energy there, and then you're like, I'm setting off, boys. Like I'm doing it. I'm out there, and yeah, I love what you're saying there, Ross. I want to hear from Bryce about how he feels about managing that fear, and it was your first time deep water soloing, right?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so when we first got to Cova del Diablo, I was pretty scared, like even on the down climb. And when we did that 12A, I was pretty gripped, definitely not ready to take a fall. But I think the next one that I did was trying that 8A in the night every cat is black. And that was honestly one of my favorite moments of the trip because kind of like you were just saying, Josh, I just kind of decided, okay, I'm going for it. And I didn't even know for sure what climb it was, so I just kind of committed to climbing and I knew I was probably gonna fall, which I did. And it honestly, like falling was more exciting than sending in that moment. Like it felt really good to just go for it and fall from farther than I thought I was going to on the first day.
You said that you set off and you didn't even know which climb you were trying to do that climb, which by the way, why do the climbs have such long names? It's so frustrating. Like
Yeah.
all the cats are black.
Our memories are just bad.
Yeah, well
Yeah, I
there
think
could be
that's
some
it.
reasons for that. Yeah. So you set off, you had the intention of climbing on that 8A, but you weren't even sure. Can you talk a little bit about that playful nature and what it brings to climbing? I feel like that's a little unique in deep water soloing.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say in that moment, I was more focused on the experience than like trying to do a route for the name or the grade or anything. And that's what made it special. And in that case, the experience was just falling off of a climb halfway up into the ocean. And that was kind of what I wanted out of it.
It's crazy that one of the most memorable moments for you was failing on a climb, right? It's like, oh, I like didn't do this. That's why I remember, and it was like really impactful. I think that's, I don't know, that says something that's a very, it's a very coach thing to think. Uh, Ross, what was one of your top climbing moments of the trip?
Uh, well, there were a lot, but there was one day on Big Fish after Bryce, you and Josh had left, but I was trying the crux moves on a rope, and basically the bottom was wet, so I couldn't give it like burns from the bottom. But after doing the crux dyno like two times on with a harness and a rope, I like wiggled out of the harness 60 feet up, which was just such a odd feeling and like terrifying, to be honest, of like loosening my leg straps and like waist straps and then just like holding a lock off on the sender as I try and like get out of my harness, and then like putting my foot just like in a little loop I tied on the rope and like trying to pull onto the wall, and then all of a sudden you're in a completely different like headspace and environment because you have no protection. And that was for sure the highest I'd been off the water and like trying a hard move. And then like the move, that last big jump, you can't down climb or like get out of it, and you're kind of just like locked on these two side pulls. So there's only one way to get out. uh, so if I managed to do the move, and then I was kind of hoping I was going to fall so I could just like get used to the falling from that height, and we had a lifeguard buddy in the water, so it was like the perfect time to take a big fall. uh, but I regrettably stuck the move, which was good. But then I kind of came out of that like flow state and was like, oh shit, like either the top is still kind of wet and I don't really want to fall from higher than this, but I can't get back to the rope. So I just hung on this jug for a while, and then ended up like half committing to the next move and taking a fall. Uh, that was like, I think my hands were probably at like 60 and a bit. Um, but that whole, yeah, sequence was probably the most memorable just because of like the contrast between being on a harness and in on a rope, and then wiggling out of it and committing.
I think your hands were at like 70, dude. I don't know.
It
That
was
jug
tall.
is up there,
Yeah,
bro.
it was tall.
It's a massive wall. It's so sick.
Yeah, can you, Ross? Can you just say what Big Fish is, just for people who don't know about that legendary Sharma line?
Yeah, it's this 9A that Sharma put up on the north side, and it's some of the best rock that I've ever touched. Just these perfect pockets, and it's basically like 60 or 70 feet of climbing and kind of traversing through this huge cave. And then you get to this little pod where you can rest for a while, which I never even got into because the bottom was kind of wet because the waves were huge. And then you have this like 12 move, like V12 basically, that ends in this big jump. Yeah, it's so epic. I need to go back as soon as possible.
Yeah, we struggled with weather a little bit. There was just massive rains, which made the ocean big. And luckily, there is some sport climbing on, actually some incredible sport climbing. And
So good, but don't tell anyone. You got to edit that part out.
okay, yeah, we won't tell anyone. We won't say any specific names, but it does make me think of Marco. I know that Loscott was probably one of your top moments, but we had another fun moment at uh, another crag. Yeah, just I still love hearing these top climbing movements, and so I just figured, Marco, do you have another one to add to the Loscott journey?
Yeah, definitely. So essentially, we had gone to this crag because the waves were too big where we were trying to climb. And it was all our first time there. And we kind of had a guide. We had like these photos of kind of hand sketched um, topos, but we didn't really know where anything was or what we were trying. And I just remember walking in, and it's so unique to Spain. Like you're just walking in, and there's these like stone walls everywhere. There's olive trees and different citrus trees everywhere. There's just massive overhanging limestone walls on all sides of you with huge stalactites, and you're looking down this valley, and there's just massive limestone walls like as far as you can see. So the setting is very unique. And then I just remember Bryce being like, "Oh, like this wall looks cool. We should go warm up over there." And we were all psyched, and we were doing this warm up. Joe Goodacre and I did this nice climb. I have no idea what it was. But then I had to take a poop, and I literally just ran up the hill from where we were warming up. And I remember coming around this corner, and I just look up to the left, and I see like a 50-meter wall with draws and permadraw or bolts and permadraws hanging like everywhere on it. Massive stalactites, like the craziest features I've ever seen. And I was just like completely starstruck. And then I like ran back down to grab my stuff, like rope and draws, and I went back up with Joe. And essentially I just chose this line in the middle of this massive wall that just had draws on it, and obviously had a bunch of holes, and just was like, all right, let's go. And I just ended up questing up this 7C. Like we found out after it was a 7C, but for me it was a really cool experience to just like not know what the grade was, not care. Again, I think it was very similar to Lost Cot, where I was just like really, really excited to climb because it felt just like an adventure, and it felt really new, and I was just climbing this climb because it looked cool to me and I wanted to climb in that moment. And I got super pumped on it because it was like a 40-meter pitch, and I remember like fighting pretty hard at the top. But it was just such like it really felt like exploring, which is something that I think is kind of rare in how a lot of people approach climbing nowadays, where you're like getting beta videos and you're looking at things in the guide and you're talking to your friends about grades. Like this felt like a very unique experience in my climbing, which I really loved.
Yeah, you painted that picture well of that valley. It was probably like a 50-minute hike in, and we're just cruising up a little road, just, beautiful olive trees, some cliffs. And yeah, Bryce was like, let's head over here. Like, this looks sick. We don't know what it is, but we'll climb on it. And then, you go off and you come back and I'm warming up with Bryce. You're like, no, dude, it's cool. You should check it out. I was like, yeah, whatever, Marco. Like I'm warming up. Like this is cool too. And I cruise up there. I'm just like, holy shit, this is one of the best cliffs I've ever seen in my life. And I said this to you afterwards. I was really impressed with you for walking up to this giant cliff, not knowing anything about it, and then just picking a line right up the gut of a 50-meter cave. Like you guys, like when you hear a grade like 7C, that's 12D, and it's like, okay, like you guys are all crazy strong. 7C is not like the most insane thing, but that just does not capture what it's like to walk up to a cliff, not know anything about it, and then to just venture off right up the middle into the unknown with I mean, there's rests, but like when it's that steep, you're not just standing there like hanging out. And I just remember at the end of the day, like talking to you and being like, dude, way to just like, that's like a climber's dream in some way. Walk up to a cliff, go right into the middle, climb 40 meters. And you also sent, which is, I don't know, like climbing into the unknown is one thing. Climbing into the unknown with confidence and doing it was a whole nother. And so, yeah, that really stood out to me, Marco, as just like a special moment. And I loved watching you do it. Like that fight. It was really cool. Really cool.
Yeah. One little thing I'll add is I just remember getting to the bolts or the chains essentially, like finishing it. I was just so pumped. And I was like very tunnel visioned at this point. So I was like, I just need to clip these chains. And I remember clipping the chains and just looking to my left slightly. And a stalactite like bigger than my body was just hanging there. And I essentially just like stemmed out onto it and finished the climb by just full body hugging this stalactite like 45 meters up this wall that I had just like ventured up. So for me, that was just crazy.
That stalactite is so sick. You can put some photos in a reel or something, Josh.
I just loved how you grabbed it after clipping the chains. Like it was like you could have stemmed and had a no hands rest or just climbed onto it for the chains, but you just bear hugged it afterwards in a sign of love for the cliff. Uh, what? Yeah, I'm just curious. Like when you look back on that, what were you thinking when things started getting tough? Like, and what'd you take away from battling the pump on the unknown? Like, were you about to give up? Like, what's it like now in hindsight thinking about it?
I mean, there was definitely moments where I was like, whoa, I'm like really pumped right now. I think I got slightly lucky, like the way that the wall forms, that there's just holds everywhere, and there's like holds behind holds. So you're just kind of like plunging your hands into things and like hoping it's the right one. And I think that I was just kind of finding the right holds as I went. But I also distinctly remember being like, oh man, like I'm already all the way up here. Like there's no point in not giving it my all right now because I can like see the chains and like I want to like fight right now. And I'm real again, I think it's really stemmed from just purely being excited to climb and being completely immersed in that feeling. Like it's almost like when you like are tingling a little bit. Like you have like needles on your skin. You're just like, I want to get on the wall right now. I think a lot of the success that I found was kind of based in that.
I just love this consistent thing of when you're psyched and you want to be there, you're kind of tapping into your best self. Yeah, Bryce, you've done a bit of sport climbing. Yeah, what do you think about seeing Marco do that, and what did you think of that cliff in that day?
I mean, the cliff was amazing. One of the best I've climbed on. But yeah, I like what Marco's saying a lot because it kind of ties back into that thing that we were talking about of like valuing the experience more than anything. And I know climbers that like actively avoid going to established areas and getting on routes that are graded because for them that ruins part of the experience. And that's obviously like modern climbing has strayed pretty far from that. And I think people now more want to control the experience that they're gonna have. But I think it's pretty cool to kind of like leave some things up to chance. And it really is like more of a adventure if you don't know what you're getting on.
how do you contrast that? Well, I guess for context, like Bryce, you're for sure the most seasoned outdoor climber of all of us. And I have a ton of respect for like your ability to go project something at your limit and like have the patience basically to like progress for a month or more. How do you balance like that sense of unknown with like trying something at your limit and like that whole projecting process?
I mean, maybe it's important to force yourself sometimes to do something like what Marco did, and just because it's harder, it's easier to like know the grade and know the beta and take it every draw and figure it all out, but I think it can be more rewarding to do the opposite. And so maybe sometimes you have to push yourself like out of the comfort zone to do that.
Totally. Yeah, I agree. I think almost all of my like most memorable climbing experiences are on things that are objectively uh, easier climbs, but like the environment is way more like awe-inspiring and uh, yeah, just more outside the comfort zone because there's so many unknowns, like all the multi-pitch stuff that we've done, or a lot of the things in Mallorca where there's just so much of the meaning behind like the climbing is outside of the grade or like the moves that you're doing, and just in like the atmosphere and like who you're there with and the overall like experience.
Yeah, I think there's something about that whole idea of pushing yourself outside your comfort zone. That is exactly why these trips are so important and why I like kind of having you guys reflect on top moments and share them too, because it's like I flew across the world. I went to cliffs I've never been to. I climbed up, 60 feet above the wire, which seems insane to me if you had told me that 5 years ago. And you come back and it changes you a bit, and maybe on your resume, like adding those ticks don't, no one cares, but you're like, oh no, that took me to a place that I didn't know I could go. And now I have something even more to give in a different circumstance.
Yeah, it adds so much perspective. You're like, wow, like I enjoyed like climbing, like the moves on that 12D Marco were probably like that overall experience was, it's probably so much more informative than like raging at some, I don't know, two move V12. I don't
Yeah,
want to speak for you,
100%.
but
No, I mean, 100%. Yeah. And I think this has been a cool chance for me to reflect because I don't think I really recognized just when I never fully recognized when I was climbing my best. It was always because I was just excited to climb and I was fully immersed in that. And I think, like I said, a lot of other climbing for me on the trip was not my best climbing. And I think I was not in that same headspace. There was a lot more like ego involved and just I wasn't there for the moment and just living.
what would you
So
have
it's
done
cool for me to
differently?
reflect. That's a good question. I think just constantly checking myself back into like the place. Like, hey, I'm here in Mallorca and like this isn't something I can always be doing. So like let's just try to be really grateful because there's just so many things to be psyched on out there, you know? Just the views, the people, the food, the quality of the rock, the style of the climbing, like there's so much to be immersed in and so much to be excited about. Just trying to like check myself into that more.
Yeah, that feeling of excitement you're talking about is something I've been thinking about a lot lately. I've had this observation that after I am in a situation where I have a lot of adrenaline going, I then end up having like a really good climbing session later. And I don't know what the connection is there, but I've talked to you guys about it with surfing, and I've had a similar experience with high balls. And like even this weekend, I like went to Eldo and I tried this multi-pitch that ended up being like pretty scary. And then I went to the gym later and just had an amazing session. And I don't know if it's like a flow state or what it is, but I just feel like I'm firing on all cylinders. And every time I pull onto the wall, I'm just trying as hard as I can. And I'm just so excited to be climbing.
I love doing a warm up high ball. Like when you're out, like if you're outdoor, you're gonna like try to send something hard, and somehow like you're pulling around on some like V0 jugs, getting some blood flowing. Then you go and you do like something a little spicy for you, and somehow like that flip of adrenaline, like oh okay, I'm warm now.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember Ross and I had that observation in Bishop this winter when we were doing some, like we were trying to do a hard high ball and we did an easier high ball in our warm up and still got a little bit scared. And yeah, there's something really interesting there.
Yeah, I mean, warming up risk is huge, and that's a big part of, not big, but uh, a part of coaching that I try and like bring to the clinics is like any comp move, like whether you're it's like being acknowledging like where your risk tolerance is at or like where that level is, and then trying to warm up your uh, your risk to kind of meet that the boulders where they're at, because it's natural to be scared on some like dual text paddle or some slab where you have to like switch feet. So why would you not warm that mindset up and like that intention to push through that risk, just like you would warm up your fingers or your flexibility or whatever that is.
Oh, that's really interesting, you guys. We're talking about like surfing can get you that adrenaline bump, high balls can get you that adrenaline bump. But yeah, what are the tactics for making sure that like in your session you start the risk ladder early on so that like you I don't know huck for that dino at the top of the bouldering wall even though you're indoors, or it can be a little spicy, or maybe like a coordination move that's super committing, because even though it's like a different kind of risk, I'm sure like the physiology, you're still like your
It's the
brain is
same.
lighting up the similar things. Yeah.
I remember you said that to me, Ross, when we were talking about this as like a way to replicate it in my sessions, but I'm not sure if it is the same. I think I really need to be scared for my life or something. And like, and that's what triggers it. It has to be like real adrenaline. I don't know.
Try getting the fight in ISO before
But you
heading out.
can
Is
you can like make up games and stuff that are like genuinely risky and like endanger your well-being in ISO.
Yeah, but isn't that a bad thing to do before you compete?
No, not at a super dangerous level, but like balancing on like a foam roller and like trying to do an ollie or like log walk it, or like using like a lacrosse ball and like bouncing it between your legs and like trying to get it back up over your head or something, like, or there's like so many different little things that are objectively like risky, like jumping onto like a Bosu bar ball from like a ways away and like trying to balance, like maybe you're gonna roll your ankle, but if you don't, you're gonna be so locked in for the comp.
It's a risk you have to take sometimes, I
Yeah, I
guess.
mean, genuinely.
Risk it for the biscuit,
Exactly.
as Al would say.
you got to just shout out Al Rangel, and I know
Yeah,
he's had influence in all you guys, and me too.
he's all of our
That guy.
coaches. Like, and I met these two because I came to training camps that he organized at Mesa Rim, like I don't know, 10 years ago or something. Um, but yeah, Bryce and Marco were the OG San Diego boys, and then now I'm living here, and Bryce is gone.
Yeah, I mean, to me, Al is like literally just a one of a kind genius in the sport. Like, I don't know if there will ever be anybody like him. Just the way that his mind works is it's amazing. I really just enjoy him as a person. I think he's just done so much for the sport. I don't know if people like will ever even know how much he's done, but he's the GOAT.
Well, I agree with you, except for I'm just going to say that he's got a lot more to give still. I think it's he's early on in his career, and we've done a couple of great podcasts with him, and yeah, I'll link those. But Bryce, you said that when you surf, you get a little scared, and you'll have a good session in the gym. But I also think that when you first told me that, you were actually talking about like the playful nature. And I tried to allude to this earlier when we were talking about like how deep our soling can be playful. Like you said something along the lines of, I'll go out and surf and it'll just be kind of fun. And that you thought that sometimes that allows you to be more playful in your movement when you come in and climb. And I just wanted to hear you link those again.
Yeah, that's something that I've really been trying to bring to the youth team I coach this season is like setting up those environments where I feel like play is happening, because kids are so good at playing, and if they can do it on the climbing wall, it can be pretty awesome to see. Um, but yeah, I don't know exactly what it is. I think part of it is maybe like a willingness to like fail over and over and like fully commit to like scary, crazy stuff. Um, I think playing games and collaborating is a big part of it.
Any thoughts on play from you, Marco?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just an inherent part of our sport, and I feel like most climbers are kind of inherently playful people. I think play and creativity are also very tightly linked. And I think creativity as a climber is one of the most important qualities that you have. So I think when people lose the ability to play, they're probably going to become less creative, and that's not going to be great for their climbing. And that kind of works vice versa. So incorporating play so that you're having fun and you're enjoying yourself, but also using it as an outlet for creativity when you're like, I think some of my favorite sessions ever are just like walking around the gym and just like making up dynos with the boys, and like, or just, yeah, on the spray wall, like, ooh, let's see if this works. And I think, again, there's just this really tight link in between playing and being super creative that is essential.
Totally. And I'll walk into the gym and Marco will be coaching the adult team or youth team, and they'll be doing the most ridiculous games, but it's so functional and like translates very well to your climbing practice. Like again, if the goal is to climb well on boulders that demand like risk and creativity, like why would you not want to warm those things up before giving sunburns? And like even the spray wall, like Bryce mentioned before, is a really great way to force that, because you have to make up your own boulders and you have to inherently be like more creative. And then it's usually with a crew, so you're building off one another's ideas, and it's just a richer learning environment than having your headphones on and like trying this one move over and over again.
Yeah, I do think actually having your own ideas is like a really important part of it, because then you also have more buy-in. And I will say, like, so many climbers now are so spoon-fed and unable to make up anything with commercial setting and light up boards. Like, most people aren't willing to just walk up to a spray wall and make up a boulder, and I don't know why, but I think it's dumb.
I mean, it's scary sometimes to like make something bad, but that's like the risk that it takes to like do anything good. Like the risk that we were talking about before could be social as well. Like if you're in a comp and there's a bunch of people watching, like that is you're putting yourself at risk of like looking bad or being made fun of or whatever it is, even though you're 100% of the time like conflating it because you care more than anyone else. But uh getting used to that and like pushing yourself to like take social risk, I think is really important as well.
Dude, that is so true that social risk can be just as scary as climbing high up. Yeah, there's just something about having people watch that, I don't know, you just don't want to look like a fool doing the wrong beta. But what does that even mean, the wrong beta? Like, what if you
Yeah,
made it work that way? And how would you know if you don't try it?
which is all the more reason to get back to like the things that really matter, like we talked about at the beginning, like just staying present and like bringing the focus inward, because all that other stuff is just a distraction.
Yeah, yeah. So when we started talking about play, it just became clear from, I don't know, from what Bryce was saying, from all you guys, that it's this like present moment, this like very zoomed in onto what's in front of you, being both open minded, not so judgmental, not so fearful, just kind of present in what is in front of you. And like it's, it's somewhat of like a cliche where it's like, oh, just like be present, focus on what's in front of you. But the reason why I keep picking at it is because it's a cliche, because it's true, yet somehow it's really hard to make it happen reliably. And that's why I like going to some of these more tactical things. It's like what you're saying, Russ, it's like, oh, you want some risk, and you're like in ISO doing nothing, well, you have a foam roller. Like, here's some things you can do. And I think that's like very, very smart to like try to break these constituent parts down that allow for these things to happen versus just saying, I don't know, you guys be present. Good luck.
Yeah, and I've noticed that a lot coaching teenagers. Like they're obviously socially have anxiety or whatever you want to call it, and they're scared to fail in front of people, and it can hold them back so much from learning. And when we do have these like magical spray wall sessions where one of them will like make up a silly crazy dyno and then like try it and fail in front of other people, and then in that moment you can just kind of see the ice is broken, and then from there they're like way more willing to learn and try crazy stuff in front of people, and then they start climbing much better.
Yeah, you guys had this in spades where we were definitely lighthearted and definitely made fun of each other nonstop for just pick whatever you want it to be. But then there is still this undertone where it's like, yeah, but I'm here to support you on whatever dumb thing you're going to do, such as climbing Weatherman when the ocean was so big that you got pulled out to sea. I don't know. We shouldn't go into, unless Bryce probably wants to say have his piece there. But yeah, if you
Let me hear it, Bryce. Spit it out.
Well, yeah. So basically, we went to Calisanao. It was one of my last days of the trips, and I really wanted to climb this cliff. I was really hoping it was going to be climbable, but
It was
I saw the
climbable.
waves crashing against the cliff, and I just made the decision. I'm not gonna do that. Like, I'm gonna drown. Um, and I honestly like didn't really even feel self-conscious about it. I was pretty confident I made the right decision, but Ross decided he was gonna go try it, maybe out of
Out
spite
of
or to make a
spite.
point, which I respect.
No,
Um,
I'm
but at that point, I was like, oh, I guess Ross is really comfortable in the ocean, so maybe this is like acceptable for him. But the climb was soaked. You whipped off the top, and then you started getting sucked out pretty fast. And I think like Marco immediately recognized like this is not a good situation and kind of told me, and we both kind of like snapped into trying to remedy it. And I immediately started like fixing a line, and then Marco had the idea to tie a dry bag to it and throw it out, which was really smart. Um,
Thank you, Marco.
yeah, so then we were able to like get the dry bag to you, which it miraculously got sucked in the current to you, and then I like put the dry bag on belay and kind of like hauled you back to the cliff. And even then, it was really hard for you to get back in. So I was kind of pissed. I don't know. Like, well, I wasn't pissed at first because you were actually recognized that you were being dumb, and then later you were like, "Oh, that was actually totally fine." And Marco and I just were pissed.
Bryce, I don't know if you remember, but I said something to you like once. I can't remember if Ross was just about to go, but I wanted to climb too, right? Like we were both super psyched on that cliff, but then we knew that there was, some dry, sport climbing to do. I was like, dude, let's just get out of here. And you were like, no, like this is really dangerous. Like we should stick around for Ross. I was like, oh yeah, you're a good friend. That's right. And I'm glad you did. It also made me think of something that I learned that is classic. I think this was classic Ross, but it was all you guys where as soon as that did happen and we rescued Ross, even though he will say that he could have gotten on his own.
No, it would have been bad on my own. But I would have survived, but it would have been like an epic.
All right. What I thought was interesting is how after this all happened, I can't remember who I was talking to. It was either Marco or Bryce, that regardless of what the facts were, I'd like that, Ross, you were confident in yourself, like no matter what. And so let's say you are wrong and that you would have drowned and sunk to the bottom of that beautiful blue sea. If your mindset had been like, I can't make it, well, then it would have been that much more likely. Like even if that was the actual outcome, I just like that your mindset is always like, I'm going to make this work. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to get back in one way or another. And I just think like there's something about that unerring confidence, in the face of danger that is important, even if one could call it foolhardy, as long as you don't put yourself into places you shouldn't be, why would you ever want to have shakeable confidence?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, and I did learn a lot from that experience. And Josh, you made a good point of like you made it back, but had another thing gone wrong, then you would have been in a really bad situation. And I think that's always important to take into account when you're running like the risk analysis. It's like, sure, everything was like in my risk analysis, it was like, yeah, I'll be fine if I fall. And even if the waves are like worse than I expect, or blah, blah, blah. But had I got knocked out or something when I fell, like, or that one extra thing, uh, then it really would not have been okay. So I think doing the kind of running those scenarios through in your head beforehand, no matter what it is, and trying to have an air margin that includes an unforeseen challenge is important, and having people there that can like do what Bryce and Marco did and like think clearly and help a drowning friend out. No, not drowning.
Yeah, it's funny
Treading
because
water friend.
that day is actually partially what made me think of the point I made earlier about adrenaline. Because when we were setting that up for you, like I was very much in a flow state. Like I had a good amount of adrenaline going, but Marco and I were kind of locked in together on like setting up this system really quickly. And then we went afterwards, later that day, we went to this cave, La Cuenta, and I just felt like so geeked up that I like barely warmed up and immediately pulled on the 7C, which normally I never do, and like immediately started climbing super well. So that's like an interesting thing because it was non-climbing related, the adrenaline I had earlier, but it did affect my session positively a lot. So maybe that's the other comp strategy is have your friend almost drown before and rescue them. Put your friend in a terrible situation and rescue them, and then go to a comp and perform really well.
Yeah, you're welcome. I was just trying to
Yeah.
help you out. I knew you needed
Yeah.
a little bit extra to climb that 7C.
Yeah, you're right. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done it. Thanks.
All right, I didn't mean to publicly flog you, Ross, for that. It was actually one of the takeaways I had from that day was just that nonstop psych to go and do more. So just like you were saying, we end up at La Cuenta, Bryce, but we had driven all the way to Calisanao, which was like 45 minutes an hour. Ross like gets in. He knows that we're not going to climb there that day because it's clearly wet and the waves were big. But then we went to another cliff, and then it was raining too hard there for us to hike in the 50 minutes. We went to another cliff and then climbed all day. And it's something that Ross, you said a lot was like, oh, we'll do a double day. Okay, well, like we'll start Sharma Cliff, like just we're trying to do everything. And it was something I took away from the whole trip was just that always pushing. And it both got me outside my comfort zone, but it's also like this, almost like this kind of present moment stuff that you were talking about, Marco, was it's like, we're in Mallorca. Maybe we can't do it all, but let's fucking try to do it all.
Totally.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting being good friends with Ross because he's definitely he likes to push those limits of like what you can do in a day, which I think is amazing. And I think it comes from a really good place, but I also think, and I think he would agree with me here, it can come back to bite you a little bit when your goal is to be kind of focused on one thing. So I think it comes from a really good place, and I definitely think it's a quality you see in more high level climbers. Like, you know, I'm gonna be climbing from like 10 a.m. to like 10 p.m. If I'm outdoors and I only have a day. Like, I'm gonna push, and I'm gonna try to hit all the spots that I want. But I do think there's a fine line to it as well, which is interesting. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Bryce or Ross.
That is something I've noticed that I do like about, I think both of Marco and Ross, your guys' approach to outdoor climbing, maybe because you're comp climbers, is sometimes you don't really care about like trying a route and then trying it more and try to do it. You more just want to try a bunch of different routes. I think it's because you're more focused on just the act of climbing and trying to climb well. than doing a certain route, which I think is cool.
Yeah, and I agree with Marco where I think I definitely have a lot to learn from being more singularly focused, which is why I was kind of asking about that projecting mindset with you, Bryce, because I think of the three of us, you're definitely the best at that. And like even the other cliff we went to, Fragwell, like you went there once, and then for like 2 days, you were just like, I need to go back to Fragwell. Like all I want to do is try that one climb. Um, so it was cool to see you like that committed to like that one project. And same with you, Josh. Like on HK, like every single day, Josh was like, I need to try HK. Like I want to try HK, and we did try to go there a lot, and we're kind of foiled by the weather. But I could definitely learn to have more of that, be more vocal about like just trying that one thing that really matters and being okay letting go of other opportunities that objectively are still going to be really cool, but not quite as uh, intrinsically like rewarding as that one thing.
Well, one of the positive things of being around that kind of energy was that it came from this place of support too, where I was like, I want to go get on HK, which is like a cool line at Callison now, which it was just always wet. We drove out there so many freaking times and did not climb on it. I climbed it like one day at the end and it was soaking wet. And I just felt like, Ross, if I had said, hey, the waves look like they're going to be low, it's going to be dry at 5 a.m, like, will you rally? It was like, yeah, dude, like I will be there. And then it's like, and then afterwards, could we go out to this cliff, do this thing? I think there's just something about that requirement of enabling those around you to achieve what they're looking to achieve that is really important in a crew. And so yes, it can lead to you trying to do too many things, but there's also just this like, you guys got my back, like you're willing to wake up early or drive the extra hour to make something happen. And that was a big takeaway for me too, is like I was like, I want to be like that in a crew. I want to be someone who everyone knows that I'll rally with them to help them achieve whatever it is that they're looking to do.
Yeah, it was cool. I feel like we all kind of had different objectives for the trip, but did a really good job maximizing like our time and uh like staying together like as a crew because we knew like everyone would have a better time and like uh at least for like safety as well if you're like deep water soloing. uh so it's cool to like kind of manage all these different uh goals, and then like if you're not climbing you're just like in support mode, which was really fun as well.
Yeah, that support mode role is actually surprisingly clutch, where even though you're so alone on the wall, you need someone down there, keeping their eyes on you. And it really, like, when I did that 8B at Cova del Diablo, and I was like alone in the cave, like it was kind of the end of the day, but you and Ross and Marco were in the water, like keeping an eye on me. And there's just something about like looking out and being like, oh, my friends are there. And it does tamp down the fear a little bit. You still feel on your own, but I don't know, that is some good just beta or pro tip is do not deep water solo alone. That would be a bad call. Uh, I want to touch on this whole fear aspect of deep water soloing one more time, and it's not it's the fear part I want to get into, and it could be the social pressure, it could be a comp, it could be actual danger. And we talked about how they potentially use it to your advantage versus have it hurt you. But I think it would be good to point out what exactly it is that those fearful moments bring out in climbers so that they can tell if they're experiencing it. So like maybe Marco, when you see people that are nervous, maybe it's like a comp style move and they've never done one. It could be a 6-year-old guy that you're like, hey, like here's a skate. Like what are the things that you see people most commonly exhibit that is maybe an indication that person is experiencing fear, so that when people hear it, they might be like, oh, that's me.
Yeah, totally. This is something we see a lot as coaches. And I think, it's important to recognize that it's kind of fair. Like if you're 60 and you're jumping across the wall, like you are a little afraid of like breaking something and like, yeah, that makes sense. So I think the first thing that I always see is just like a certain level of shyness or hesitation to try the movement. And that usually you can see it just through the body language, like a little bit more like tucked in, a little bit less. They don't really want to get on the wall as quickly or as often. And then I think within the climbing, of course, you're just going to see people become more tense because I think a lot of people learn how to climb in a very kind of tense, like locked elbow way. And you definitely see just it's interesting. You see a lack of commitment to moves, but people will still try it, and that usually actually makes like the thing they're afraid of happen. Um, so that's like a really interesting thing to observe as well. It's like three-quarter trying, but your body's still flying across the wall, and now like you're at way higher odds of actually just like slipping. So yeah, I think those are pretty common characteristics.
What about you, Bryce? What do you see when people start being nervous or have fear?
I think depending on how prepared you are, the fear can either lead to like an amazing peak performance or a terrible performance where you like shut down. Um, and I wish I could put my finger on exactly what being prepared looks like because I've experienced both of those extremes. But I'd like to have more tangible things I could do to like set myself up for that. But I can't say I can exactly even remember what set me up for like my best performances on like a comp or a run out versus the times I kind of shut down.
I'm actually more curious, not just in what it is for you, but what do you see in others that you're coaching? Because I think that sometimes people don't realize that they're performing poorly because they're afraid. And so like an example would be for me, this will happen to me where my feet will start popping like for no reason on like good feet. And then sometimes it'll be this self-reflection moment where I'm like, oh, like I'm freaked out, whether it's, social pressure, danger, maybe just like, I really want to send, And so like, like what are some indications that you see in athletes or even yourself that you're like, oh, right now you're freaked out.
I would definitely say just trying to over control movements, like lock stuff off and grip really hard and not be willing to just throw your body into the next position.
What about you, Ross? What do you see?
Yeah, I mean, everything that Bryce and Marco mentioned, I think like a narrowing of your vision and perspective. So like literally like what you're seeing goes to like this, which is really detrimental when you're trying to find like creative solutions and like coordinate all of your limbs. Like if your awareness is just your hands on the wall right there, you're going to be so much more tense. And that's probably why your feet are slipping, Josh, is because you're like focusing up here and pulling and holding more tension in your upper body and losing that awareness. Um, your breath as well is a huge factor. Like that's like one of the things I do throughout the day. It's like anytime I'm feeling like anxious, just like try and connect back with your breath and be like, when is the last time I took a full like deep breath? Like I honestly, I don't think I've taken one full. Actually, this morning I did, but like all the way in through your belly and then like chest and shoulders, and then like fully exhale. Um, I think that's like a really simple thing to do, like throughout your session, like before you get on the wall, taking that full deep breath. Um, and then I'll just add that I think in a lot of ways, fear is just not knowing like the steps that you're doing, and like one of the easiest or like most practical ways to address the fear is like running through the steps that you're going to take and then thinking about like the confidence level that you have with each of those steps. So like for a skate, like if you've never done a skate, like of course you're going to be scared because you don't know how you're going to jump to that volume or where your foot's going to land, or if your foot could even land on that volume if you were going to try and put your foot on that volume. But then once you can, or like, that's why it's really important to tone down the difficulty of those things so you can answer the questions and be like, this is specifically like what I'm going to do. I'm going to throw my foot onto this volume, and I'm pretty confident I can do it because the volume's huge. And then as you get better, you make that foot smaller. And it's always important to, like, it's okay to have question marks with that sometimes, and like just acknowledge that question mark, and that helps reduce the fear because you're like, oh, I know what it's coming from, and I know if my foot does slip, like, I'll be fine. So I think it's sometimes it's pretty cool to like take that more pragmatic approach, and then that gives you the confidence to go hop on a new climb and just not be analytical about it because your body kind of knows the answers to those questions already.
Yeah, man. Those are so many good tips for what to do when you identify that you're freaked out. What I was really trying to do, and you guys totally did it, is get this like multi-step process in this like helpful loop where it's trying to identify, oh, I'm afraid. And again, like you can have fear for so many freaking reasons. That's why sometimes it's obvious. You're like, well, I'm going to break my ankle if I fall off this 30-foot highball boulder. Like, of course I'm afraid. But sometimes you just are feeling a bunch of tension, and maybe you don't realize that the reason why you're climbing like shit is because you're freaked out for what, I don't know. It can be a myriad of reasons. And then, like Ross, you were just listing a bunch of ways to mitigate that. Okay, like you're afraid. Okay, let's identify what it is. Let's take these steps. Maybe it's, one of the first steps is take a breath. And I think that then when you get into this thing of, I notice I'm afraid, I take this response to address that fear. Now and then I perform better. And you're making it this like kind of instinctual loop where you look for attention, you look for fear, you know what to do, and all that thing just starts happening faster and faster. Because my hunch is all of you guys, I mean, I will speak for myself, I get afraid all the time for all those myriad of reasons that we talked about. And when I looked at that, like my like top moment or whatever, when I was climbing that 8B, I think that I you know if you look at the video of me doing it, it looks really clean and easy, but I am just having that quick loop over and over again. Like, oh my God, I'm freaked out. I'm going to do this. And typically a lot of it was just being in that moment, being present, and that resolves. And then I take another move and I'm freaked out and it resolves. And I think like the tighter you can couple that is just leads to a lot more success than if you wallow in fear or you never take those steps to address it, like you were talking about, Ross.
Totally. And the last quick thing I'll say on that is like finding fear or in other forms of life beyond climbing is very helpful in like confronting that fear within climbing. So like surfing or whatever it is, right? Those are like the same chemicals that are being released in your brain that are saying like, oh, like, I don't know if this is okay. Like I'm being a little apprehensive. Like, what's going to happen? Am I going to get hurt? Am I going to get made fun of or whatever it is? It's like the same exact chemicals in your brain. So if you can seek that out more consistently in your everyday life, then you're going to be more prepared and have that like tighter feedback loop when you're in the gym climbing.
What do you think about, did you see that clip of Honnold saying something about almost like the opposite, where he's like, you should go out and get afraid in climbing and then realize that life isn't that scary?
Yeah,
Did you see
they're
that
both
clip?
true. I reposted that clip actually. I think that was the only thing I've ever like reposted of Honnold's. But I was like, yeah, that is so valuable. It's all just perspective.
All right, you guys, I fucking love the trip. I loved the wine. I loved the ham. I love just that easy way you just fall into that consistent life of get up, maybe roll out a little bit, maybe a little bit of stretching, maybe a little bit of self massage or helping your buddy out with the tight shoulder, and dropping by the store, picking up just basics that somehow tasted even better. than wood at home. I don't know. They got some kind of magic over
The
there.
bip bip.
Yeah. Hitting the bip bip was a morning. It's like a 7-Eleven or like a crappy little, supermarket that somehow like that sun-dried tomatoes that we put on our sandwiches. Just, and you just fall into this life of consistent fun of eating normal food, being outside all day with your friends, and then leaving it was a stark contrast to remember like how special that was. And so I want to ask Marco, I'll start with Marco. How do you make a good trip great?
That's an excellent question. Oh, there's so many things that come to mind. I think one is obviously just in your preparation. Do you more or less have an idea of what your goals are? Are you setting up the trip in a way before you even go on the trip so that you're going to be able to do those things? I also think a lot of it just comes back to kind of like, almost feel like the theme of this podcast, but just constantly checking yourself back into the moment and trying to be like really grateful of where you are. Like for me in Mallorca, I love food, and I felt like I've never eaten so many good meals in my life. So just like being able to appreciate those moments, like, wow, this is really unique and I'm having so much fun like doing this. For me, that's what makes memories really last forever. And that's part of what made this trip great is I feel like I had so many moments where I was just like, I need to be present right now because I know how rare this is, and I just love everything that's going on here. Like I'm with my best friends, I'm eating the best food in the world, I'm in the most beautiful place. Like, um, so yeah, preparing yourself well, but also when you're there, just trying to be immersed and grateful.
I like the idea of that almost like flip flop, like prepare, think about the future, get ready, and then when you're there, just be there. Um, Bryce, what about you? What do you think makes a trip great?
I mean, obviously, it depends how you define a great trip, but I think in terms of performance, like the next thing that comes to my mind, like past preparation, is being able to like move on between different days and different routes. And I actually think because there's so many factors in climbing, it's like better to not be logical and analytical. And I think sometimes you can actually be a little bit delusional and like have a delusional self-confidence in yourself. And that's something I've kind of been playing around with that can be fun and I think work pretty well. Because sometimes you might get completely shut down on the 12A warm up, and you could still have a chance of doing the 13A first try, if you just convince yourself that it's possible.
Delusional self-belief. That's I'm laughing because I really like that where I I had my top climbing moment on that 8B on COVID El Diablo, and I had tried the 8B to the right, and I had tried it at least twice, and failed. And then the expectation for me to then do the 8B I did first try, or first try in the sense that I had done the start, like had to be a little bit delusional because I had just failed on the thing right next to it multiple times, or in days prior. And I don't know. I always wonder how to have delusional self belief because again, it's like this oscillation where I would just go back and forth between there's no way I can do this to fully locked in and flowing, and so just I don't know. I don't know if that brings up any insight to you, Bryce, but I love that quote unquote delusional self belief.
Yeah, I think you have to recognize that sometimes climbing really doesn't make sense and like anything can happen in a moment if you let it.
I like
Yeah,
that.
Bryce, I really like that. I think that's something that I struggle with like the most in my climbing. I think I'm only ever kind of hard on myself and I draw negative conclusions too quickly. So it's cool to hear you talk about that because that's something I definitely need to work on.
Before I hand it to you, Ross, there's something I just want to point out right there where you guys are all coaches and you guys help people get better and you guys are experienced climbers, but you don't know everything. And just that little conversation that you guys had, like Bryce and Marco, where it's like, oh, that's a good way to put it. And, now I learned something new. Like Marco, you're a coach and people look to you to be an expert. What's your framing on not always having all the answers and still learning, yet being someone that people look to as an expert?
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about this a lot. I think it really starts as like shifting what we look at as a coach from like a traditional to a more contemporary view. So I think traditionally coaches have a playbook, they have all the answers. Like you do something, they tell you what you did wrong and how to fix it, and you go do that. I think there is a place for that in the coaching world, but I think for a sport like climbing, where there's so many body types and so many different ways to do things, developing a more contemporary approach where your job is really just to create an environment where people are going to be able to express themselves. And I actually just read like a really great analogy for this. They were essentially like comparing coaches to a gardener, where the gardener doesn't doesn't grow the tomato or the sprouts. He just waters the plant, makes sure it gets enough light or gets the light that it needs. Essentially, he's just cultivating an environment where that plant can grow. And I think that is really important for coaching climbing. And I also think that being an athlete myself and making a lot of the same mistakes that my athletes make allows me to relate to them really well and have a perspective that where if I did everything perfectly, I would just never understand like their problems.
What do you think about that the idea of not being an expert, but maybe not always having all the answers, Bryce?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of cheesy, but the failing, like the more you fail, the more you know. So, as someone who's failed more than anybody, like I know how that works.
Why do you say that?
I mean, I'm kind of joking, but I've climbed for a long time and like I competed for a long time, and I just think, yeah, I've failed a lot. And I think as an athlete, like how you deal with that failure is one of the most important things in moving forward.
Yeah. When I hear you say that, it's not that even just admitting the failure, like if you can't acknowledge that you have things to improve on, then you're really screwed.
That's the true failure.
Yeah. Whoa. Um, okay, Ross, you can comment on the topic we just had, or if you want to tell me what you think a great trip is comprised of. You've been on quite a few of them, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of one and the same. I'm glad you brought up that, because my answer to the how do you make a good trip great is like surrounding yourself with people that are gonna hold you accountable to like your best self, essentially. And I think there's like a level of like intimacy there where you have to be with people that you respect and are comfortable calling you out on things you don't necessarily want to hear. Uh, but that's like how you keep that really rich like learning environment going, and how you set yourself up best for success. So always kind of having that balance of like what are everyone's goals and like checking in with one another and like trying to be aware of what other people kind of need to uh, climb to their potential is huge and really helpful when there's lots of distractions and you're in like this crazy like sensory rich environment and you're deep water soloing and blah 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 blah. But at the end of the day, it's like I needed Marco just to say, okay, like what are you going to change before this next go? And like that's what allowed me to like focus in on that one specific like intention ahead of me doing that 8P. Because a lot of the time, like you have the answer, like you know the answer, but you need someone to help like kind of tease it out and to be able to articulate it. So having people that are going to do that on a trip is huge. And then from a coaching standpoint, it's yeah, super important, or it's been super helpful for me, like being an athlete and a coach. Like the coaching has made forced me to be a lot more articulate about that my own like ideas and like goals while climbing. So like I know I'll have like an idea of like an idea I want to convey to an athlete, that I know what it feels like to do that move or like have that sensation, but then trying to put it into words to describe it to someone else teaches me a lot and makes me better at doing it in high pressure environments, and hopefully teaches the other person as well.
All that dovetails into kind of my thinking around what I'm gonna give my idea of how to make a trip great based on what I experienced with you guys. And I've been on quite a few trips, and one of the things that stood out to me is, of course, the crew is super important, but what I thought made this trip great was that idea of what you're saying, Ross. Like how I put it's like everyone put out 60 and expected 40. Like this is a really minor thing, but like we'd be gone for the day. Maybe Marco would be at home grinding on school, and he had cleaned up the house. And then I'm like, oh man, like Marco cleaned up, like I better do all the back dishes. Or like I know that Ross really wants to do this climb at the Sharma cave, even though like I want to go to Callus now. So if he wants to go in the morning, like let's rally around that. And to me, it's like it's that whole thing where you're somehow a crew with multi variable goals, but somehow you make sure that you only expect the crew to put in 40% towards your goal, but you're going to put in extra to try and make it good for everyone. And I felt like I felt like you guys did that really well, and it made me want to be better.
Thank you.
That's an excellent takeaway.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never thought about it that way, but that is very true.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Ross said makes me realize that like the fact that the two of us, for example, have such different approaches to climbing is like what makes us a great pair to go on a trip together, because we like influence each other to like break out of our normal approach. Because I think so many climbers just get sucked in to like what they see other climbers doing, and they hold themselves back so much in that way.
All right, guys. I loved it. I want to go back next year. That was my fourth time on that particular island. I'm open to new island boys. If we want to be island boys of some other island,
We need to
I'm
conquer
there.
another island.
But if we had to go back to Mallorca every single year forever, we could do worse. So thanks for bringing me back for a moment. Now it's like 40 degrees outside right now. It's definitely not balmy Mediterranean weather. I mean, no complaints because I'm going to head to Bishop and I want some temps. But that was a special time that I really appreciate getting to share with you guys. And thanks for sharing your takeaways. I really did. I learned a lot, and I think these trips, now me being a bit older and having gone on all these trips, is that you always do learn something. You did get outside your comfort zone, and reflecting on it and kind of crystallizing some of the things that made it special, I think somehow cements it in your memory, and then you get to kind of hold on to it for the rest of your life. And my little tip to you guys, me being a touch older, is that you don't get to do them all the time. Like they seem kind of like something you're just doing, but even when you start adding it up, you're like, okay, I'm going to do a trip a year, maybe even 2 trips. Like honestly, like that's not that many. It's like, oh, you get a dozen. Oh, you get 2 dozen. It's like, that sounds great. But honestly, like, hold them special in your heart, because it doesn't last forever. But yeah, I don't know. Let's do another one soon.
So down. So
Yes,
down.
let's get out.
And
Let's get after it.
yeah, it was cool, Josh, to have you there and like have that like learning mentality. And maybe some people that are slightly older don't always default to that, but you were like just as curious to learn about like the different things that we're doing. And I hope it felt like that energy went both ways, where like you have so much to teach us that it was cool to be able to ask questions around business or other climbing stories or endeavors that you've been a part of. So yeah, just having like that learning mentality with everyone you're with is so important.
Yeah, I'm really good at opening up wine bottles in a bunch of different ways. There can be
Yeah, thank you.
shoes, wine corks, so that, I bought a lot of twist offs. Yeah, no, it's always interesting. Climbing does this thing where it brings together people of all walks of life. And I just have this general belief that you can always learn something from whoever you're talking to, just literally anyone you're talking to. And I just was stunned by how much I had to learn. Like I said, it was my fourth time at the island, and you guys showed me a whole new side of it, and I appreciate that.
Josh, I'll never forget the quote that you dropped. It was, pessimists die right and optimists die rich. I'm pretty sure that's what it was.
Was it? No,
Was
it's
that it?
it pretty much. It's pessimists sound smart and optimists get rich.
Beautiful. I'll never forget that one.
You already
Except for
forgot
the part
it.
where you just forgot it.
Now I will
You
never
should have been
forget
taking
it.
notes.
I should have.
That's too good.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good one. I definitely stole that from somewhere. But dude, it does go hand in hand with like literally all we're talking about, where it's like Ross is like, okay, I'm gonna like venture into the ocean. I'll be okay. And dude, we dragged him out, and it's a good story. And Marco, you were like, I'm gonna walk up to this. I'm gonna walk around the corner. You stumble upon beautiful cliff and just venture up with confidence. And like, why not just say like, oh, like maybe this one's going to be too hard. Like, let's check out the topo. Like, maybe this one's too, like, I need to find the easy one no, it's like, I'm going to make it work. It's going to be great. And it was like, so yeah, optimism is always my default. All right. It's an active choosing though, right? It's an active choice.
Yeah. Dream big and be optimistic and like confident in your abilities.
Good to
That's
great.
inspiring.
Like
Sometimes delusional.
Yeah. Delusionally optimistic. Okay. All right, boys. That was a blast. Yeah, until next time, let's find another island or go back to that same one. But also, again, shout out to Joe Goodacre and Scott Rojon. They were definitely island boys. It's just that they got there a little bit later, and we had developed so much time climbing with each other that was like, when I thought about the takeaways, I learned a lot from you guys specifically, and so I'm just glad to kind of sit down, crystallize this, in all those moments, and yeah, just had a blast. So thanks again, you guys.
Yeah. Until next time.
Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like even more content, go to patreon.com/testpiece. And while you're at it, share this podcast with someone you know who would love it. And please leave us a review or rating at wherever you get your podcasts. We've also got tons of great content on YouTube and Instagram, so don't forget to like and subscribe there. Okay, see you next week.